Watch right now in the Front News Project, the response for Sumy. The Ukrainian armed forces completely destroy the 112th Russian missile brigade. Crimea trembles again. New weapons of the Ukrainian armed forces will liberate the temporarily occupied peninsula. The Russian army near the Dnipropetrovsk region, the Ukrainian defense forces harshly confront the invader. Watch fiery, hot and blazing footage from the front line right now. The fourth year of the full-scale war, the war that Vladimir Putin and his entourage unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces and the entire Ukrainian people in the fight for their freedom continues. Greetings, this is Front News. This is Vladimir Timoshenko with you. In the next 30 minutes, you will get the truth about the war, which our journalists gather from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then, let's begin. And we start right away with exclusive material. The Ukrainian armed forces are fiercely dismantling the 112th Guards Rocket Brigade of the Russian Federation. In a minute, you will see these unique shots. These are the very guards who delivered a deadly strike on the peaceful residents of Sumy on Palm Sunday. And once again, Crimea has been shaken. New Ukrainian UAVs are in action. At least the Russian Ministry of Murders reports Crimea was attacked by new aircraft-type drones. They are also called unmanned bombers. Meanwhile, Putin's soldiers are acting on the principle of hit your own so that others fear you. Imagine, at least 8 aerial bombs were dropped by Russian planes on the Belgorod region since April 11th. One of the villages was attacked twice. All the details. Let's watch.
Revenge did not take long. These are the shots of the shelling of the 112th Guards Missile Brigade.
Look!
This is the very brigade that was killing Ukrainians in the city of Sumy on Sunday. Well, here's your answer.
I almost gave birth. Ha! I got goosebumps!
Interestingly, the Russians spared air defense for such an object, and they are unsuccessfully trying to shoot down the UAVs with rifles. As they say, air defense in Russia is only for the chosen ones, and the drones, as you can see, are hitting the target precisely. Let us remind you that earlier, the Ukrainian armed forces struck the permanent deployment point of the 448th Missile Brigade of the occupiers in the Kursk region, who are also involved in attacks on Sumy. And at this time, Crimea also trembled. The Ministry of Murders in Russia claims that Crimea was attacked by 2 aircraft-type UAVs. And by the way, deep state analysts claim that the Ukrainian armed forces have started using the latest Ukrainian ultralight UAVs, the B-1 aviation complexes, at the front.
The B-1 UAVs are light bombers designed to destroy personnel, vehicles, and armored equipment. In addition, it should be noted that these UAVs can destroy the specified targets, both at the front line and in the enemy's rear. According to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, these drones can carry various types of munitions, and most importantly, they are equipped with powerful low-noise engines that allow these UAVs to stay airborne for several hours. In addition, the B-1 has increased resistance to electronic warfare systems.
Moreover, the Ukrainian army is repelling a daring enemy attack in the Novopavlovsk direction. As you can see, the Russians are launching an attack with more than 24 armored vehicles, several tanks and more than 12.5 BMPs with infantry. But all of this was shattered to pieces, along with the enemy's infantry. And while the Ukrainian armed forces strike the enemy, the Russians strike their own, as they say, to make others fear. At least 8 aerial bombs have been dropped by Russian planes on the Belgorod region since April 11th. One of the villages was attacked twice.
Since the beginning of 2025, according to estimates from the Russian side itself, there have been at least 59 incidents of unintended bomb drops, including 44 FABs and 7 UMPBs, as well as 3 missiles falling from Russian planes on both Russian territory and temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is evidence that the Russian Federation is effectively facing the issue of lacking the capability for modernization and current major repairs of the aircraft of the Russian aerospace forces due to sectoral sanctions from the United States and EU countries.
Additionally, North Korea continues to assist the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin in his aggressive war against Ukraine. According to Reuters, over the past 2 years, North Korea has sent the Kremlin about 16,000 containers with ammunition.
It should be noted that North Korea supplies the Russian Federation not only with artillery shells. Let me emphasize once again, according to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, this amounts to about 4 million artillery shells. But accordingly, we are talking about the supply of KN-23 tactical ballistic missiles. Plus, accordingly, there are strike drones. In addition, the North Korean side also supplies, accordingly, Koksan 170mm self-propelled artillery and other types of military equipment.
And you remember that North Korea helps Russia not only with ammunition but also sends its cannon fodder to the war.
And also, you know, Moscow has been at the bottom for more than 3 years now. The fact is that on April 14th, 2022, our defense forces sent the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moskva, underwater. It was the greatest shipwide of the Russians, becoming their most costly loss. What remains of the Moskva at the bottom of the sea? What remnants have Ukrainian scientists managed to retrieve over 3 years? And how much more Russian military junk will follow this Russian warship? TSN correspondent Olena Hushchik will tell more.
The most powerful and astonishing.
The most powerful ship of the Black Sea Fleet with a satellite system and supersonic missiles on board. A battlecruiser where leaders of different countries have met multiple times. It also has its own headquarters and even an air defense system. In general, the pride and symbol of the Russian Federation, which, as befits a symbol, went to the bottom of the Black Sea.
To the bottom of the Black Sea.
The cruiser Moskva. It was the defense forces on Snake Island that sent it on its well-known course. The ship ended its journey 3 years ago when it was hit on April 13th and sank on the 14th.
This, in my opinion, I think, was the most powerful, the most technologically advanced ship of the Black Sea Fleet since 1982.
The value of the Moskva was estimated at $750 million. It was essentially a floating air defense system, thanks to which the Russians controlled the entire space over the Black Sea. The destruction of the Moskva allowed for the liberation of Snake Island and the unblocking of shipping trade routes.
It was used as a command ship. That is, it could actually accommodate about 50 to 60 staff officers, and they could manage the ship's aviation and marines. For this, it had special equipment.
How many sailors died on board is unknown. The sunken cruiser continued to send greetings and signals for a long time, as civilian sailors found rusty oars and leaky life rafts in the middle of the sea. Probably out of the 5,000 Russian crew, someone did try to swim out, although Mr. Andre is sure it was difficult for them even before the arrival of the missiles.
The weather was stormy with dark clouds looming overhead, heavy rain and strong winds. A significant number of the crew unfortunately simply got seasick. None of the air defense systems were working, and those missiles just hit the ship.
Thus, the monster of the Black Sea turned into a broken plastic toy, unwanted in the middle of the Black Sea. Although even from the bottom, it has already acquired a new status. Officially, the underwater cultural heritage of Ukraine. The Russian warship became famous in March with a record 1 million copy circulation. It spawned hundreds of now historic memes, became the hero of exhibitions, museums, and films. All with the main thesis, Ukraine built the Moskva, Ukraine burned it, and now Ukraine is studying it. After all, the cruiser was built in Mykolaiv. Gradually in parts, the flagship is now being resurrected in a Ukrainian museum. These are the remnants of the legendary Moskva, which our sea washed ashore. A lifebuoy, a signal buoy, and also the remnants of the Neptune missile, which sent the ship to the bottom by all laws. They are now being studied by Ukrainian scientists.
And here the Guard missile cruisers, such as the well-known... And here the Guard missile cruisers, the specific number 121 at that time, was carried only by the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the missile cruiser Moskva. So this is an original item, this is a real item, this is an item from the missile cruiser Moskva.
In the Central Naval Museum of Ukraine, they also know the exact coordinates of the sunken Moskva. Director Sergei Voronov says the depth there is about 50 meters. This means that it will definitely be possible to retrieve many interesting items from there. The flagship itself is large, so even beginner divers will be able to descend and see it at least from above. Moreover, the Moskva conveniently sank near ancient ships and already modern wrecks of the Russian fleet.
This is the one of the 3,000 sunken ships that we know of, which lie in the waters of Ukraine and are on our records. Most of them are not sunk but damaged. For example, the Saratov, a large landing ship that was destroyed in Berdyansk, we did not record because it practically did not sink. It ran aground.
There are plenty of exhibits for scientists on the seabed. Then, in the 2 years following the cruiser Moskva, Ukrainian defenders sent at least 6 landing ships to the bottom. The largest of them are the Olenegorsky Gornyak, Minsk, Novocherkassk, and Caesar Kunikov. The submarine Rostov-on-Don, a missile boat, several patrol ships, and even a naval minesweeper also went to the bottom with their entire cargo. In the year 24, the defense forces somewhat hastened the squadron's departure from Crimea when the ATAC MS strike the missile ship Cyclone. After this, the Magura drones finish off the smaller boats one by one, and finally, the General Staff report states 29 Russian naval units destroyed. Can we say it like that? 15 serious ships remain, for example.
Well, about 12.5 are frigates, which are precisely the missile carriers. These are corvettes, missile corvettes, and a few landing ships remain.
Ukraine has finally driven the Black Sea Fleet out of the Crimean bases and did so not only without its own fleet, experts say. It continues to adhere to the strategy of primarily destroying what is used to launch missiles, deploy troops, and where ammunition is hidden.
We drove the enemy out of the northwestern part of the Black Sea, lifted the blockade from our ports, and launched maritime cargo flow to our ports.
In Sevastopol, only damaged ships remain at the moment, which the Ukrainians occasionally send back for repairs. Due to a lack of forces, the Russians have relocated the base of the surviving ships to Novorossiysk. From there, missile carriers are still taken out to sea under full cover of patrols and helicopters. And the most valuable assets are hidden in harbors under the protection of a dozen Russian air defenses. Of course, there are still many monsters in those ports capable of handling the most powerful combat missions. The occupiers are tirelessly looking for loopholes to protect them. However, our naval forces are acting proactively and know exactly how, where, and when the entire Black Sea Fleet will go to the bottom.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now an analysis of the operational situation on the Huliaipol and Orikhiv fronts. The enemy continues its military terror. In the Huliaipol direction, enemy aviation struck Huliaipol with unguided aerial rockets. In the Pridniprovsky direction, the terrorist country struck Kherson with caps. In the Orikhiv direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled an enemy attack near Mala Tokmachka. Stepne, Lukyanivske, and Kamyansky also came under airstrikes. And this week, all of Ukraine mourned the victims of the brutal strike by Russian terrorists on Sumy. I remind you, on Palm Sunday, Putin's ballistic missile killed 35 innocent people. Among the dead were 2 children. The Kremlin fiends killed the entire Martynenko family, the father, mother, and their 11-year-old son, Maxim. More about this horror in the next chilling report from our colleagues at the television news service.
Today in Sumy, they are saying goodbye to the Martynenko family, the father, mother, and their 11-year-old son, Maxim. They died on Palm Sunday while they were on their way to church for a service. In the hall of the Protestant church that the family attended, there are dozens of photographs of the deceased. Always smiling, happy, united, that's how they are remembered here.
Positive. They always had a smile on their face.
I knew him. He was interested in football and Minecraft. Cheerful, kind.
He was located.
They were at that spot at that moment on Petropavlovskaya, not far from here, when those missiles, those Iskanders, arrived.
The family lived in an old village not far from Sumy. The boy was interested in football. During the attack, the family was near the site of the first strike. eyewitnesses say. When they were running to shelter, the Russians launched a second strike with a cluster munition missile which took their lives.
In the 21st century,
this should not be happening. To ensure humanity doesn't die in such matters, we must simply shout, we must publicize this. Because if we remain silent, as Jesus said, the stones will cry out.
As a result of the Russian attack, 35 people died. 127 were injured. 32 victims are still in hospitals, including 6 children. 6 patients are in intensive care. Among the severely injured is 1 child. As a result of the explosions, let me remind you, more than 50 buildings were damaged. More than 1,000 broken windows have already been covered with plywood sheets. Roof repairs are ongoing. Utility workers and rescuers have been clearing debris and removing structures of destroyed buildings for the 4th day in a row. The street hit by Russian missiles is still closed off. They promise to restore traffic on it by tomorrow.
But now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front line. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. On the Pokrovsk front, since the beginning of the day, Russian occupiers have made 48 attempts to dislodge our soldiers from their positions. In the areas of the settlements of Sukaya Balka, Staraya Nikolaevka, I Zelenoi Pole, Vodyanoi Vtoroe, Yelizavetovka, Novotoretskoye, Romen, Lisovka, Kotlino, Uspenovka, Preobrazhenko, and Andreevka. The defense forces are holding back the onslaught and have already repelled 45 attacks. 3 clashes are still ongoing. Enemy aviation also struck Malinovka with guided aerial bombs. The most important news, for the first time in several months, the Russians launched an assault with a column of equipment to break through the front near Velika Novosilka and reach the administrative border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. At this time, the 72nd Brigade, named after the Black Zaporozhians, is reinforcing this section of the front. In fact, the enemy's advance was stopped, but their assault groups continuously attack Ukrainian positions several times a day. Special correspondent of TSN, Yulia Kirienko, witnessed how Ukrainian fighters are driving the Russians out of their native land.
The Russians are dragging their wounded, whom they finished off. Now they are heading into the bushes. We are sending out the skids.
The fruit orchards of Donetsk region have become a battlefield on this section of the front.
A group of 7 people is moving towards our positions. They are flying out at them now.
7 is not a small number, the fighters say. The goal of these enemy soldiers is to reach our infantry positions by any means, even if it's just one of the assault troops.
They accumulate, and then make a dash. Accumulate and immediately try to break through on all sides.
They persistently advance, the soldiers say. Even when wounded, they try to move forward. It seems like there's no way back for them, our fighters say. The drone operator provides evidence of this. At night, when they repelled a similar assault, one of the wounded occupiers didn't even try to call for evacuation. He chose another path.
You can see him lying there turning over his rifle. Before that, they dropped shrapnel on him, and it got to him. He decided to shoot himself. Perhaps it's easier to die that way than from the shrapnel. Probably not as painful for him. And no one rescues them. They abandon all their wounded, not taking a single one.
In the morning, a new group of assault troops moves along the same forest strip. Our reconnaissance drones constantly keep them in sight. There should be even more of such drones in the unit. The pilots equip strike FPVs. The enemy is still several kilometers away from our trenches, so there is time to lure the Russians into the so-called kill zone. And here is the result of another hit on a Russian soldier.
Right now, at this very moment, we have been actively working in real time, and it caught fire.
The accomplices of this Russian are somewhere nearby, but they don't even try to help him. They just leave him among the trees and simply move on. This is what our military calls the meat assault of the occupiers. If one assault group doesn't reach our trenches, they immediately send a new one. And so it goes on without stopping. The lifespan of a Russian in such an assault is just a few hours.
One of them is a 200, one is a 300, and we're currently searching for the rest in the bushes. But this is a matter of half an hour to an hour, and we'll take them out. Their lifespan is up to several hours.
Their task is to reach the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. And although there are only a few kilometers left to the region's border here, the Russians cannot overcome them.
According to our information, they have the task of reaching the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region by the end of March. That is, to take some strategic supply objective. It is absent here. I think that the main task is primarily to enter the Dnipropetrovsk region for the first time since the beginning of the war. In one of the clearings, 800 meters long, we counted more than 100 enemy bodies, but the enemy continues to move along this clearing.
Here's another hit on enemy soldiers. The group of Russians is practically defeated. The soldiers of the 72nd Brigade, named after the Black Zaporozhians, did not let them reach our infantry. This brigade was recently reinforced in this direction.
This is already the third enemy standing against us. Our battalion alone inflicted losses on more than 400 enemy personnel, over 10 tanks, and 30 units of armored and lightly armored vehicles. About 2 battalions. Before this, they tried to advance using only manpower. Then they brought in equipment, and for the first time, in about the last month, the enemy used 10 units of tanks and armored vehicles, which had not been seen in this direction for several months.
But in the village behind these Russians, our drones are detecting new occupiers. Drones can't reach there, but artillery can. There are a few minutes left until the command fire, but our fighters cancel it. The drone pilot sees 2 women walking between the ruins on the street.
We don't do anything to them. They continue living there. There is a child in the southern part. He's about 10 years old.
To avoid harming the locals, our forces don't shoot, and they have no choice but to wait until the next group of attackers comes out towards us again. Drones should be enough for them, say the Black Zaporozhians.
And now we move to the Novopavlovsk direction of the front. The bloody frenzy of the enemy's army continues here as well. In the Novopavlovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled 6 assault actions by enemy troops. The enemy tried to advance in the areas of Constantinople, Razliv, and Privolnoye. Aerial strikes targeted Alexandrogorod, Voskresenka, and Novopolye. It was another hellish week for the liberated from occupation but tormented by Russian brutal bombings, Ukrainian Kherson. In the morning of April 17th, the military of the aggressor country carried out an airstrike but on the central district of Kherson, resulting in at least 2 deaths. To terrorize the city, the Russians are using both artillery and aviation. Just imagine, they dropped 4 guided aerial bombs on a sports complex, leaving only ruins behind. Details from the scene are coming up in the report from our colleagues at the television news service.
A hellish morning in Kherson. The enemy is shelling the city with multiple rocket launch systems, artillery, and guided aerial bombs. Residential areas are under fire.
We managed to run into the corridor and then everything started to collapse. I don't know how it happened.
And when emergency services, utility workers, and social workers arrived at the site of the airstrikes, the Russians shelled them with artillery. How they targeted people trying to help is visible during the recording of the address by the head of the Kherson City Military Administration. Greetings to you, dear residents of Kherson.
Early this morning, we once again, unfortunately, experienced... There was just another artillery strike. As you can clearly see, there were several KAB strikes. Specifically, according to preliminary estimates, 4. As a result of this morning's shelling, a sports facility, a supermarket, civilian cars, apartment buildings, and private homes were destroyed. That's what happened. May the Lord have mercy. We've experienced this 100 times.
It is known that 1 man died, who was hit by an enemy strike on the street. 3 more people have been hospitalized with shrapnel wounds. As a result, a 20-year-old girl sought medical attention. She was diagnosed with a concussion and blast injury. Those who managed to escape were terrified and had an acute stress reaction from such a massive bombardment.
Blood pressure went up slightly.
As soon as the shelling started, they jumped into the garage, and there both of them started shaking. They had to be pulled out. But no injuries, right?
No, just stress, only stress.
Due to damage to the contact network in Kherson, trolleybus movement has been halted, and buses on some routes are running intermittently.
Well, now it's time to analyze the situation on the Kramatorsk and Toretsk fronts. The situation here is traditionally extremely tense. On the Kramatorsk front, the enemy is trying to advance in the areas of Chasiv Yar, Kurdyumivka, and towards Shtupochki. 3 out of 5 attacks were repelled by the defense forces. the battles continue. On the Toretsk front, the enemy is attempting to penetrate our defenses in the areas of Toretsk, Azaryanivka, and Druzhba. 2 attacks are still ongoing. Our defenders have already successfully repelled 4 assault actions by the invaders. Ukraine suffers daily from the most brutal missile and drone attacks by the enemy. Sumy, Kryvyi Rih, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Odessa, not to mention the settlements that are in close proximity to the front line. In just the first 4.5 months of the 25th year, the Russians launched 11,500 drones at Ukraine. And there are also deadly missiles, and also including ballistic ones. But is there a technology that can now completely shield the Ukrainian sky from Kremlin drones and missiles? Our colleagues from the Specker project have investigated this issue.
April 13th, 2025. Amounts. At 10 in the morning, 2 Russian ballistic missiles attacked the city center. 34 dead, including 2 children, and over 100 injured. Russian terrorists launch Iskanders with cluster munitions at the frontline city to cause the maximum number of human casualties. April 4th of this year, Kryvyi Rih. The center of the enemy ballistic strike becomes a children's playground. The missile exploded in the air several dozen meters above the ground. The cluster warhead takes the lives of 20 city residents, among them 9 children. More than 70 wounded. On April 6, 6 ballistic missiles attacked the capital. Only 1 is successfully shot down. 1 person died, 3 were injured. Russian aerial terror becomes significantly more dangerous. Instead of cruise missiles, ballistic Iskanders and North Korean analogs increasingly appear in the Ukrainian sky. In Ukraine, they were quite accurately shot down by Patriot systems, but the hit rate is decreasing.
The enemy has made certain upgrades to these Iskanders, making it more difficult to counter them. It's not always possible to achieve a 100% success rate as it was before.
They are not being shot down because there are no means to do so, military experts say. Only a few American anti-aircraft missile systems cannot protect the entire territory of Ukraine from ballistic strikes. There is also a shortage of missiles for the Patriot systems. Annually, no more than 600 of them are produced, and that's for the entire world. President Zelensky, from the attacked Kryvyi Rih, calls on the participants of the April Ramstein meeting to provide Ukraine with at least 10 additional Patriots. Considering that 3 times more are needed, explains aviation expert Valery Romanenko.
We minimally need 3 dozen Patriots. We currently have only 5. Well, for example, to cover 23 regional cities and another 7 for particularly important sites, hydroelectric power plants, nuclear stations.
Meanwhile, Russia is only increasing its missile production. Ukrainian intelligence reports that the enemy is focusing specifically on ballistic missiles. According to military analysts, Russian terrorists are capable of producing 50 X-101 missiles or their equivalents monthly. The production of ballistic Iskanders has increased by 1.5 times over 2 years, reaching 60 per month. Additionally, 30 regular Iskanders and another 5 to 6 Kinjal missiles. They have to be shot down using only foreign systems. Long-range NASAMS, Patriot and SAM-T systems protect the skies over some strategic facilities in the rear territory. Ukrainian aviation, along with F-16s and Mirages, can approach closer to the front line, but complete reliance on slow foreign aid forces the air defense to conserve resources. The most widespread aerial terror is caused by enemy strike drones. The Russians are constantly setting new records for the number of Shahed drones used. Ukrainian mobile air defense fire teams are operating at full capacity, but recent swarm drone attacks on a single location are forcing Ukrainian forces to devise new countermeasures.
A large number of Ukrainian companies have already offered solutions for automatic turrets with video-based targeting, for example, Yosalt to intercept aerial targets. Additionally, we need to talk about anti-aircraft drones. Furthermore, we should discuss certain developments of small anti-aircraft missiles that exist in Ukraine.
Anti-aircraft drones and laser turrets are becoming effective Ukrainian weapons, and foreign countries are already showing interest in them. However, the main problem for Ukraine remains countering enemy ballistic threats. A missile defense shield like the Israeli or American air defense systems is a story of the distant future. However, the long arm of retribution should soon appear.
The most effective means of defense for us will be a long arm of domestically produced ballistic missiles. Their range is 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers, so that the hydroelectric power station system on the Volga is within striking distance. If a war starts, we will immediately strike these power stations and half of Russia will be in darkness.
In the coming months, it is unlikely that Russian aerial terror will cease. Both frontline cities and rear centers are under threat. The Kremlin's primary goal is to deplete Ukraine as much as possible, including its air defense. However, peace on the terms of Russian terrorists is impossible, and this has been proven for the fourth consecutive year by the Ukrainian armed forces. That's all for today. But very soon on the Front News program, there will be new unique materials from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.